Hey everybody, welcome back to the Open Peace podcast. Today we have a bit of a dark subject. We're going to be talking about the war in Ukraine. With us, we have Fiona, who is my friend from college, and she also has family members in Ukraine and grew up in Russia. So she'll tell you a little bit more about her background. And of course, we also have with us Amir. So Fiona, if you want to explain, how, your whole history and how you grew up in Russia and then America and how and also your connection and maybe how your family is doing in Ukraine.
Yeah. Oh, well, first of all, it's such an honor to be with you guys and talking about such well, a sad topic today, sad current news. But so first of all, I'm Fiona. So I grew up, as Anna mentioned, I grew up in Russia. I was born in Vietnam, but my family moved to Russia when I was around 2 and spent my most formative years in Russia. And yeah, kind of learned the language and kind of adapted, assimilated into the Russian society and all. And then around 16, 17, I decided to find better opportunities and wanted to explore the world a little bit more and decided to go to the US to study for
Mhm.
my higher education. And after 6 years in the United States, I kind of, with COVID situation happening and all international students having to kind of move back, if at the last minute. And currently I'm back at my original home, mother country, Vietnam. So I've been living here for the past year in Ho Chi Minh City, and very happy again to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then can you tell us also, I think you were mentioning how your family, before the podcast started, how your family got to Russia and how they could have been in Ukraine, but they went to Russia.
Definitely. So, I guess a little bit of backstory for, why there's like so many Vietnamese people living in the in the Soviet, like post-Soviet countries. So around in the 80s, there's been a program, special program for like the most brightest students from Vietnam to have a scholarship and study in the Soviet Union. And couple of my uncles got that scholarship. I think, well, one of my uncle got that scholarship because there's only a chance for one son or daughter from the family is allowed to kind of get that scholarship and go study. So he brought my uncles with him to, have the better opportunities, and they happen to be, in Ukraine for them like after the Soviet Union just collapsed, though they've been in Ukraine since then. And my dad kind of separated, and he's gone to Moscow ever since. And that's why I've grew up in Moscow, Russia, since like
Mm.
early 90s, I think 98 around that. Yeah.
Wow. And growing up then in Moscow, what was that like? It must have been quite a unique experience. I can imagine, the capital of Russia, so much culture, history, art. What was it like growing up there?
I think in one word, it was like looking back, it was one of the I think it's an understatement to say the most kind of formative years of my life, but
Mm.
it definitely was because I kind of, my first language, I was the most comfortable in Russian, and you might know Russian language is like probably one of the richest like languages. There's so much, literature. There's so much culture that comes with it. So Russia, I would say, and rightfully so. Like it has contributed a lot to Russian, to like kind of world history, world literature. So was really, really proud to, grow up and learn and be in an environment full of just culture and history and such a rich history too. So it
Mm.
was great. It was definitely a lot of and as Russia is not like a monolithic country or like a culture, it's there's so much culture going on and there's so much diversity and and I grew up in Moscow. It's a very like very much a very metropolitan, very globalized city. I think I would say after St. Petersburg a little bit because St. Petersburg kind
Mm.
of originally, like historically, has been kind of at the crossroad of Europe and Asia a little bit more. Um, but Moscow definitely was really, real rich. And but there was some kind of adaptation issues as you kind of you know, you you live, and I remember a lot of times that definitely there was hardships, of course, like of course
Mm.
not really looking very Slavic as you might see, and as much as I could have that kind of ownership of the language, like I spoke it very fluently. I had kind of, I would say, very if someone heard me and me speaking Russian, they would definitely think I was like born and raised, and like I would look a certain way. So definitely the way I kind of assimilated was through the language, was like just knowing a bunch of historical fact about Russia. So tried my best, I would say, but definitely there were issues, of course, because of just the
Mm.
way I looked and yeah, where my families are from. Definitely was
Mm.
kind of tough at times. Yeah.
Was there a lot of nationalism in your education?
So, I would say looking back, definitely, as I mentioned briefly, that Russia is very, very proud of its history, and the way they would teach us the history with, with a certain kind of, uh, uh, there would be a certain version of that history, of course, and I
Mm.
wouldn't say like, coming from also after studying 6 years, in the U.S. U.S. also has its own version, as every country does, right? But it definitely has a lot of kind of patriotic. They would love to say that word. Very patriotic kind of messages throughout, and I was, growing up in that environment. I was proud, to say the least. Like I was really proud to have that knowledge, to have that history, even though it wasn't really my own. Like it didn't. It definitely wasn't, but I felt like I was a part of it too, like
Mm.
because they taught us that way, and we had this so much, pride and patriotism going on, and it can and at times in history there were moments where Russia had its own victories, and the nation is very proud of it for sure. And it kind of
Mm.
shows up in the current event, you could say, in the media right now. Russia is Russia, like with the capital R, with the capital, like patriotism is a capital word for us, for Russians, and it's a very, very, very proud country for its own
Mm.
history. So yeah.
Do you
Mm.
think the average Russian citizens, or is I'm sure it differs between like educated, less educated, and different subpopulations, but what's your understanding of the overall sentiment in Russia, in Moscow, towards the war in Ukraine right now?
Uh, I think um, it is it has been a quite there's been a like a division in the way people reacted to it, and the division has kind of gone more like radicalized as the time passes. Like there's a lot of
Mm.
like really harsh feelings, really sensitive. It's very tragic situation that's happening. Like no one wants war. Like that's like a default. Everyone is against the war as a concept, as the idea, as the like, kind of as a default. Like Russia has gone through so much, in 20th century, like early 20th century, like people still remember war, like the Second World War. Very, I mean, very like I would say very well, because it's people are reminded about those events every year, like May 9th, like Victory Day. Like people know about the war as it is, and they're really not, as a concept, they are against it. But with Ukraine in particular, such a sensitive issue, and sensitive issue in the Russian history and the people's like, kind of mentality, and like as a Russian identity, it's very, very, very sensitive. People are very shocked at at some like subpopulations, very shocked with what's happening, and as much as media can cover and people can protest, like there's those are the sentiments, like people are against the war, against what Putin is doing. They're saying Russia is Russia, Russian people don't condemn the war, or Russian people are kind of against Putin, but but at the same time, there's like an informational wars going on, so it's very
Mm.
hard to kind of really dissect what actual people are thinking, because the media is showing us what people should think, or what people
Mm.
should behave in this situation. It's quite difficult to really dissect, and people are very sensitive. Like they don't want to talk about much, because it's kind of like the same, I would say, I mean, it's not to the same degree, of course, but like 2016 or like the Israel-Palestinian like conflict, same. Like you're not sure if you should talk about this topic right now because
Mm.
everyone is thinking about it. Like everyone's very aware of what's happening and kind of hyper aware of what's happening, but you don't know if you want to cause this any more like division in the country or division
Here,
in the opinions and
here's the
politics.
thing, Fiona. I think what you've said it's really spot on that certain people we don't feel we're not in a world environment that people feel comfortable enough to speak about such issues as Israel, Palestine, Russia, Ukraine, and whatever other conflict. Now, our thing here on this channel is that we accept anyone's views. You're welcome to come on and you're welcome to voice your views as long as you're not
Mhm.
offending anybody and you're being hurtful to anybody. We're willing to sit down and have a listen. And I think it's really important when it comes down to Russia and Ukraine to really understand what's going on in depth and understand what's going on behind kind of the media games and propaganda and what's being said. I was just wondering, from your personal knowledge of living over in Russia, and that there is a big anti-war sentiment, and I've seen many protests going on in cities across Russia, from Kazan to St. Petersburg to Moscow to other places. Um, what do you think can be done to try and stop Putin on his, kind of tyrannical rampage that he's gone on now in Ukraine? What can be done within Russia?
Within Russia, a uh, very interesting question. I think well to from my personal experience living there's been such a strong political indifference and kind of as we mentioned like scared to even not even scared just people do not care talking about politics anymore because they just find it useless and unable to even participate in this conversation or just thinking that it doesn't make any changes and with that kind of like a lot of my peers I would say uh around those like kind of the pivotal time like 2014 when like Crimea got to kind of Russia got Crimea and it was like that sentiment of political indifference at times was just like it's their war like we can't even talk it's not even we can't talk about it like you can talk about it but it doesn't do anything anymore and people
Mm,
had those years like before I was even politically conscious I guess I'd say or my peers I think that kind of already cultivated and I think put in um put in leadership put in Kremlin as a whole like kind of cultivated that for a long time very very resourcefully like cleverly too in a way to kind of put that political indifference towards what's happening in the world, towards what Russia's doing to the world. So I think, as you mentioned, like with all those protests and to be fair, it's very hard to protest in Russia. Like you might probably know this.
yeah,
It's almost is very difficult. It's kind of it can definitely ruin your life a lot and your close ones and so okay, surely not everyone has the same resources to kind of go out there and protest as we might want or as we might wish people did in Russia, like to kind of overthrow Putin, but uh, talk and try to find like a middle ground to talk about it first and find. I mean, people. And I think I mentioned to Anna before, but like a lot of our peers like Gen Z, I would say young millennials, they have all these sources of information and they very critically think like they critically think they can filter what's happening. So find those sources and try to have a conversation and talk about that and maybe uh like kind of have that bridge because it's really
mm,
starts with even conversation. Like it's really hard to talk about this topic
mm,
within Russia. Uh
mm,
and especially now like Russia kind of follows or with it, I mean Putin knows what's happening he knows that what he does will cost to the domestic situation, and he will, he does follow up with that. Like there's more police, there's more tracking, there's more all of that, and people got to be more careful. But I think there's Ukraine is such a kind of sensitive and like such a close, like a relevant issue for a lot of Russian people because people they have relatives there, they have like families and siblings and mothers and fathers. So I think that's not going to let them just sit there and do like kind of participate in that political indifference that's been happening the past how many years that Putin's
Mm.
been in
How
the
Mm.
is
leadership. So I think,
Oh, I was just you can continue what you're gonna say.
oh yeah, that's it.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, like, have you heard anything from your family that lives in Ukraine? How are they doing?
So personally, there's it's definitely been hard because I mean my family kind of spread out all over. So there are cities that are closer to the west, I think, where kind of Russia is coming, has gone through more attacks than like Kiev and some cities on the east. Uh, oh, sorry, the opposite way, west is the way. But
Opposite
yeah,
way. Yeah.
Yeah,
the western border is the closest. Yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah. Sorry, I kind of like flipped
No
all
worries.
over. But yeah, the western borders are much calmer, much calmer. Not that much calmer, but like a little bit calmer. But the eastern ones. I have some families in Kharkiv and like the kind of surrounding area, like very close to kind of Donbass, so which that's where
Wow.
Mm.
like Russian forces are coming in, and it's quite a trouble. I think you will see those news about Kharkiv in particular, about people kind of hiding underneath the subways and like the metro stations that were kind of built specifically for those reasons to like hide from um, rockets and bombs and all. But yeah, it's
So they
quite
haven't been
dangerous
able to
because
escape. Your family hasn't been
yeah,
able to.
no, no, unfortunately not. It's it's definitely a very stressful situation kind of
I'm
in
so
within a
sorry.
family going on. But we
Mm.
we keep we keep in contact. I think partly also we believe that we kind of hope for the best, and we trust that Russians are like really mean that they're not gonna harm civilians. Like it's
Mm.
kind of like like blind hope for now. So yeah, we hope for the best here.
Well, we definitely hope that everyone on the podcast, and I'm sure our viewers too, that there's a peaceful resolution to this conflict as soon as possible. Really, you gave a great answer in what can be done from within Russia to help. I was wondering, the next question is, what can be done by Western powers, or if you like, Western people, or people that are viewing the conflict from abroad and not liking what they're seeing. What can be done to kind of put pressure on both sides to end this thing as soon as possible?
From the Western Front, I think oh well, to be more pragmatic right now, we know a lot of Ukrainian migrants are escaping through the western borders, and that's kind of been happening with the Belarusians and uh, you know and like with Belarusian conflict, there's been also a lot of migrants that just trying to escape. But and I think it's kind of going back with the whole like migration policy and like how like accepting people like escaping from war, just trying to like help them like just pragmatically help them during this time. And I think Poland has been doing that, and I've read like the news, the past news that uh more Germany is kind of opening its arms to like more migrants and just kind of people like escaping from the conflict right now. So like that's kind of the least right now they can do, like just pragmatically, because it's very difficult situation, because as much as you can say people should put more pressure to the leadership, put more pressure to this and that to have a conversation with Putin. I think like the first and foremost thing you can do is to help like what's happening right in front of your like door. Just like let the people go through the borders and just accept them right now, because it's just difficult situation. for everyone. And yeah, I think that's, Europe has been quite nice about it. I think it's such a weird word even to use, but trying to like welcome people in. So hopefully more of that. We should see that. Yeah, yeah.
I see. I see.
You think, okay, so I think the big question on the ground in the US, and I think the answer is kind of no from Joe Biden, but there's been some countries that people are saying you guys should send troops, and soldiers on the
I know.
ground to help
Yeah.
Ukraine. What are your thoughts on that?
Uh, it's quite. So I don't really have much thought about it or like kind of particular expert idea on what should happen around that because um I just don't believe I have expertise to say like they should send the troops or they shouldn't send the troops because it could easily just escalate the situation even worse. As much as I, want some sort of intervention, we all believe, we all want like a good guy going in to save the poor nation from a bad guy. We all, we believe that narrative. But like kind of playing up like that savior complex. We just want that, but I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't know. I think that's my answer because it just could practically go in so many wrong ways.
Yeah.
Um,
We see that was a disaster in Afghanistan.
yeah, I mean, Ukrainian
And
people, I
Vietnam.
mean, from Vietnam.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not, yeah, but
What
I don't
does
know.
yeah.
Hmm?
Oh, I was gonna
What
ask,
does what you,
what is Vietnamese media saying about this? Are they very pro Russia?
I mean, we're just covering the basis, like what's all the channels are showing, not too much, kind of not going into like who to support who, we're against who, we don't go there. Because just to kind of understand, Vietnam is geopolitically kind of, we are kind of on our own right now, and we
Mm,
have been, we kind of want peace. It's not we really want peace with everyone everywhere in the world because we have, Vietnamese people are everywhere in the world. Like we've kind of integrated into almost every single countries out there. So any kind of war is terrible, right? And it's just harming our own citizens out there, and we just don't
mm,
want. But at the same time, kind of just it's just a diplomacy game. I don't know, and I don't have enough expertise to say what they should think and what how they should act. Like I kind of like I think we can also look to China a lot. I look up to China and like just kind of see how it's going there. And but to be fair, like with all the Western countries and like the United States trying to like have all these tensions at first, like we thought, good idea, like maybe not, it's not too outright, like kind of going in there, and very direct, saving the country, but it's still gonna harm Russia in one way or another. But yeah, it's very tough situation to say like what they should do and what they shouldn't do. It's just they should
mm.
not have gone in there first place, and they should have this conversation way early, not like this last minute when it's escalated so badly.
Exactly. I completely agree with you. So I put the onus on these leaders now, on Putin and on Zelensky to end this as soon as possible. Obviously, I think more of the onus is on Putin since he was the one that decided to invade. But I have heard that there have been talks of maybe a possible meeting between Zelensky and Putin in Belarus, but Zelensky has, rejected that, saying that, why would he want to meet in a country where they're sending missiles from
Yeah,
to Ukraine, which is true. So
yeah,
Zelensky's offered to have it in Istanbul or in Baku or in any other neutral location, which I think is a responsible thing to do. And I think if Mr. Putin, really wanted the world to see him in a different light, he could go about seeking talks and trying to de-escalate this thing as soon as possible before many more people lose their lives. And unfortunately, as it goes, it's always old men sending young men into war to die.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it's not going to be Putin, him or his family on the battlefield,
Yeah, I
which is.
Yeah.
that is very true, and I think that sentiment I would definitely is shared by a lot of Russian people themselves. Like, you know, Russians themselves, talking to objectively saying like, who actually wants to take the weapon and go into Ukraine and to fight? Like, if they were to do that survey, I think I would expect the result to be majority like negative. Like we don't want to do that because who wants to really do that? Like right? Like even for the love of the country, as much as they believe that cost. But I think it's just leaders need to talk. Like as we kind of mentioned, emphasizes more more so now, like they need to kind of have this conversation, like not us not us trying to like figure out for them, but they have to have this conversation, like just lock them in the room and try to figure a solution. Otherwise, what kind of leaders
Is
you
there
are if you can't talk, right?
is there
Mhm.
a military draft in Russia? Like, are people forced to serve in the army, or it's volunteers?
As of right now, it's not. I think I mean there is a draft. Like if you're, above 18, I think above 18, under 65, as I remember. You are kind of on the roster.
Right.
And I think if you're in like a special, like a kind of highly critical profession such as like doctors or police or whatnot, you are still on the roster. So on the roster, despite like doesn't matter what gender you are. Like even if you're female, you can still be drafted easily if you're a part of those professions. I'm not sure about this, but like I think that's what I remember from like last time I kind of lived there and I kind of was around.
Or
But uh,
boys, like, but boys who are 18, they don't have to go to the military?
They have to. There are exceptions. If you are in university, like if you have a bachelor, like if you're getting a higher education, I think, or there's special conditions that I'm not sure, but I think most of them are, or it's like a required. It's required, I think.
So,
Uh,
like, yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of like who are these people who are coming into Ukraine who are fighting these war? Are they like people who are volunteering to do this and really believe in the mission? Are they just kind of forced to go there because they were required? Because I
I
think
think most people are required. Like I think the Russian army is required. It's you can't. Yeah, I think yeah, it's required. Yeah.
no. So it's kind of
It's very similar to Ukraine. It's required. If you're
it's required
Mm.
in Ukraine as
above
well.
18, under 65, you have Ukrainian passport, and you are able-bodied male, like you can get drafted easily. I mean, not easily. It's a requirement. It's a mandatory.
Mm. I think one of the things that people forget with regards to this conflict is how connected Russia and Ukraine are. If that's by, culture, language is very similar. You have Ukrainians and Russians that live on both sides of the borders. They either work or
Mm,
emigrate back and forth. There's train lines connecting the countries. There's roads connecting the countries. We're talking about very, very interconnected place. And to see neighbors go at it like this it really is very, very saddening. And I really do hope that these leaders do sit down and do discuss how to de-escalate it all, Fiona. I think that'll be best for everyone, including your family that's over there in the
yeah.
Ukraine, and including for Russians that don't want any of this to happen, and the ones that we've seen out on the street, out protesting. Um, trying to have their say. Um,
Definitely. Yeah.
with regards to the Russian media, Fiona,
Right.
I'm not too familiar with Russian media. I was wondering if you could break it down a little bit for us, how the conflict is being portrayed over there?
Definitely. I mean, for the most part, the media landscape in Russia is uh all like state controlled.
Hmm.
So I think very few channels are kind of independent, or the few are that already are at least have some sort of filtering that's happening. And it kind of pertains to both like traditional media, so I mean like TVs and newspapers, to the more digital kind of age, like online media, and kind of I think, yeah, for the most part that. So the current, what I've been getting from most coverage just uh have been like, you know it's it's a special operation that Russia has to conduct. Uh, there is a necessary kind of uh, note that Ukraine is kind of on this very sensitive uh, issue that Russia is trying to kind of get. It's kind of like when you have a younger brother and he does not listen to you. So that's the the portrayal that's going on. Like, this younger brother is not understanding what actually is wrong, and he's being corrupted by those other forces. So we're trying
Mm.
to do right by him, and we're trying to serve this purpose, and it's a righteous purpose. And to be fair, that kind of coverage has been for a while. It's not nothing new, and with the kind of the war, like the invasion that's happening, it's just the coverage, the basic, very basic coverage of just what's had been happening, but a lot of opinions about those coverage. So like when you read any news, you always try to get like both like factual, like what's happening, and opinions, right? Like usually on the New York Times, you see the opinion, the column, and there's like a what's happening. But here's kind of, I feel, from what I've been getting, it's a lot of like mixed. Like it's just a lot of opinion on what's happening rather than the other way around. Rather than just like facts, you read like, okay, this is, at this time this happened, this time that happened, or this has been covering this. But it's just a lot of like kind of like Zelensky does not want to get into this, so like the Zelensky, does not want to get into conversation with Kremlin, like, and this is how bad it, like they don't want to end this war. Like there's a lot of that. It's just like opinions, and a lot of, again, opinions that they want to insist into the masses. And
Mm.
yeah, I think, I mean, I grew up with that media for a while. I mean, like up until I kind of moved to Russia, or to the US even. And I must say, I really believed it for the longest time. Like I couldn't. It was really hard to, like, to study IS at some point. So I studied international relations, and with Anna in college. It was quite a shift for me to like get so many other like sources that are not like Russia focused. It was
Mm.
wild at first, because uh, it was such a shift in narrative. I was like, we're not the main players, like we are, or not. It's not we're the main players, but it's not the first narrative going on. It's just like we're just part of this plan that we kind of create for ourselves. It's a weird narrative. Like we kind of like twisted me a little bit.
Mm.
But a lot of younger generation, like around, like, our peers, they all reading like both Western media like freely. They get, BBC, they get CNN, New York Times, The Economist, Financial Times. They got all those newspapers, so they get all that perspective, and their own perspectives. They get to critically think and filter it better than I could have done it like years ago. So yeah, definitely a lot of media. A lot of it is like controlled. A lot of it is controlled.
Can you break down exactly like why why does Putin think that, and maybe even for those of us who don't totally get the difference between Ukrainian and Russian culture, Ukrainian and Russian language, and then Eastern Ukraine having Russian speakers but being part of Ukraine, and I don't know how familiar you are, but if you could just like maybe explain some of the cultural and language differences.
Definitely. Sorry, I think I lost the first half of your question due to connection. Can you
Um,
repeat that?
just how is Putin viewing Ukraine culturally, because they have a different language. Why does he see it as Russia? Why does he see it as we need to invade, we need to protect? Like, is he seeing Russian speakers as being oppressed in Ukraine? I thought their president, like Zelensky, is a Russian speaker, right?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I think with my very limited knowledge of I like Russia slash Ukrainian history and like you know mutual history that has been happening since like the conception of ancient Russia. But I what we can from the media itself, like Putin views Ukraine needing to be rescued because there's been so many, especially Russian population needing to be rescued because because historically, like he believes there's a growing Russophobia in the world, like people like against Russians and against Russian history and like and all of that. Like when you say like so he it's this question of like us versus them and but applied in Ukraine because Ukraine has historically belonged to Russia or to like Soviet Union. It was under this one bloc and previously before, right? Um and when it kind of like Ukraine kind of got it, detached itself and developed its own very rich culture and history and kind of stood on its own and wanted to integrate a little bit with integrate with Europe and also be friends with like be friendly with Russia and old like Soviet bloc. Um, and Putin kind of saw that as there's a growing nationalism and there's growing corruption in Ukraine and there's growing Russophobia in Ukraine and the Russian people who are historically kind of belong to Russia but like they ended up with Ukraine a little bit the Donbass area that there's like two republics that have been kind of pro Russia I'd say he believes that Russia has to go in and invade and save those people. Like he's saving Russian people. That's what he believes in. Uh,
So why
and
does he need to come to Kiev if because Kiev wouldn't have a minority or it makes sense kind of why he would go to Donbass, but why go all the way to Ukraine to the west too?
I don't know. I think we would have to ask Putin, but from what I understand, like the narrative that's been given to in the media to us, I think the idea is that um, the Kiev, he believes that the Kiev government has uh, sold out the country. Like the current regime is corrupted and is detrimental to the to its own development, to the Ukraine's development. So he wants to save it. He wants to save the country from itself in a way, or its own like corrupted agents that kind of currently the corrupted regime that he does not agree with. Also, that
He's
he's
been
kind of
calling,
not under his control.
and I've heard that they've been calling like the Ukrainian regime. They say it's like Nazis.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So denazification, they call it. So his mission objective is denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine.
That always confused me because the president of Ukraine is Jewish. How are they claiming that it's a Nazi government?
You tell me. You tell me.
Do people like know that in Russia? I mean, they must. It can't be like a
I
secret.
mean, we know if that's the sentiment again, as I previously mentioned, like everyone knows what's up. Like everyone knows that those reasons are probably not valid, as they try to shove it into our throat. But who cares at this point? Like not this reason, he will find a different reason, right? Like with NATO, like coming in, like it's very valid reason for a lot of Russian people, even though like they probably not agreeing with the invasion, but they believe that NATO being super close to Russia is not a good idea. It's like if Russia took okay, like in theory, like if Russia or China just kind of got like very close to United States borders by taking Mexico, like as an example, like or like
Right.
getting Mexico to join their own like aliens, for example. So I think that's the whole like there's also like this they need to protect themselves. So protecting their own country, their own motherland. That's the narrative also been going on. And with patriotism, like Russians are very patriotic people, and
Mm.
as a whole, like I'm not saying there's been issues, I guess, but as a whole, it's always been portrayed and is very patriotic country, and they will protect its country. Uh, whoever the enemy is, and I think that's us versus them narrative is very strong. It's very prevalent right now.
Yeah, that's crazy. I guess when you say the NATO thing, I guess when you say it like that, it does kind of make sense. I mean, we did have in the U.S. the whole Cuban Missile Crisis over that,
Right, right.
Um,
So it's quite hypocritical, right, for United States to say something in regards to this, right? Like for Russians, I mean, I'm talking from a Russian perspective. If I was still kind of consuming that media, I would believe like, why would we want that? Like, why would we want this situation to happen? Like, when the whole like United States and NATO is getting closer and closer to Russian borders. That's not because Ukraine always acted as a buffer. That's the thing. Like historically, Ukraine has always been that buffer. Now Ukraine goes away or get corrupted. Like, how would we protect ourselves, for example? That's a very convincing, I would say, message. For it's very simple, but very convincing.
The thing is, I get all the stuff with regards to NATO being on Russia's doorstep, and I get all of that. But you have what's called sovereignty and national sovereignty. Ukrainian national sovereignty, the borders are there. Now, regardless of what is going on in Luhansk and Donetsk and Donbass and all these other regions that are maybe are they Russian, for the people there to decide on what future they want, and preferably without war. Unfortunately, these leaders have decided to go down the war route and the destruction route, and this is my issue. When we see the indiscriminate bombing of Kiev, and we're already seeing places even in Western Ukraine like Lviv and places like that being attacked, um, it's to me it's very shocking, the world's reaction, and the kind of, well, we're going to just let this happen. Well, the West, okay, we're going to throw a few sanctions on Russia, which really isn't going to hurt because they have the Chinese behind them. So I really do think it's scary to see, you know, the kind of, I don't know if it's lack of empathy. Maybe it is a lack of empathy actually with the people that are actually over there now in Ukraine and that are having to suffer the consequences of war. It's easy to sit in your bedroom in America or in Canada or I don't know where rockets aren't falling and having an opinion. Whereas if you're in Kiev and you're a Ukrainian, you don't, and you're a fighting age, you don't really have an option. The way I view things, you wouldn't really have an option.
Definitely. And it is a privilege to even have this conversation, to have this uh kind of kind of going through scenarios and just list of what can go and what cannot go wrong when we talk about this situation. But it's definitely worse when you kind of know it's on your doorstep, or personally in that situation, or you are in that situation yourself. It doesn't it just it doesn't matter if like, that's my issue too. Like I don't, in the end of the day, it's such a, like, talk about geopolitics and all this kind of imperialistic ambition of this one country that decided to have this solution at this time. It's so, you feel why. That's the only question I have all the time, like, why? And
Mm.
why can't we have another solution? Like, there's always a solution, right? They teach us
Yeah,
in school, like every single subject, like there's always a solution.
yeah,
At work, they always tell you there's always a solution. You just everything is your choice. Everything, you have a choice, right? It's kind of, you always have options, right? And there's a solution. Why can't they come up with a solution? Why should people suffer for their lack of, uh, I don't know, with a lack of anything right now? Like, I feel like they're lacking a lot of things, and why should people suffer because of that. You know, yeah.
Yeah.
You're spot on. You're
Also,
really spot on. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Anna.
oh, I was gonna say, like in response to what you said, I wouldn't say it's a lack of empathy as much as I think it's more like it feels more like the world is kind of being held hostage in some ways by nuclear weapons. Like, I wonder in a world with no nukes if the US would be helping possibly and sending troops on the ground. But also too, I think there's a lot of this is the US has learned from the past couple wars that we've had that us sending troops to another country can make things worse and not better. And I think it's interesting with imperialism in general, whether it was Vietnam or Russia invading Ukraine, or the U.S. sending people to Vietnam, and or the U.S. sending people to Iraq and Afghanistan. There's always this narrative of we're saving these people, and I think there's just a lesson to be learned in how dangerous that is. And in this podcast we talk a lot about Israel Palestine. I think it can be really dangerous when you say you have to take over a place to save people. That's I think one of the big lessons I've learned is that that's a common thread, and people will use the idea of saving other people to justify really bad things.
Mm, mm,
It sounds very like if you put it into like a individual level, like a relationship or whatnot, it sounds like a very toxic, abusive
Yeah.
partner. And I don't know, I try to like think of metaphors with like Ukraine and Russia, and it's just like like a sibling, two siblings. Who this younger one, I'm talking about Ukraine here. Like younger one just wants to get to know the world and maybe kind of make some mistakes along the way. Sure, like that happens, right? And or live its own life, makes his own decisions. And the older siblings for some reason try to manipulate and kind of get in the way of, or just straight up being bully at this point, because there's a lot of levels to it throughout the history, but at this point it's just bullying, straight up
mm,
really bad kind of bullying. And when it comes down to it, like the bully needs therapy, and I think Russia needs a lot of therapy at this point, a
mm.
lot. But yeah, but hopefully. I mean, so it goes. So as I'm, talking to you guys, the news kind of updates like every second, right? Like every single change within next second it can be monumental for the course of this conflict. And you just hope for the best at this point, and we can have this conversation. We can push for more uh, people to have this conversation, and this should stay in the information. And we should have the stories of people like having families there. So as Amir says, empathy matters at this point, because we have so much news lacking it, and we need that more. We need people actually empathizing with what's happening. I think empathy can change the world in a way. Yeah.
100%, 100%. I think, yeah, people that maybe haven't lived through conflict find it hard to connect to that reality, because it's so far removed from their day to day. We do just have to remember that, unfortunately, war is probably one of the dirtiest businesses there is out there. And unfortunately, it is always going to be the innocent civilians that suffer the brunt of that. And we're seeing that already with the thousands of refugees that have left various Ukrainian cities for the borders. So we do really have to hope that this thing comes to a peaceful resolution. And let's hope that this meeting that Zelensky has proposed, Putin, whether it be in Istanbul or in Baku, they can get to that meeting, and they can hash things out, and get the troops to retreat, and people can go back to leading their normal lives. That would be great. And one of the other things as well, I just want to mention that the irresponsibility of, if that's even a word, the level of irresponsible, the level of stupidity that Mr. Putin is going under. A world has just been through COVID. We've just been through 2 years
Yes.
of this weird, crazy situation where people have been infected and it's been terrible. And now to put the world on the brink of World War III, I don't want to create any panic or alarm. And it's not World War III. It's not, it's not that yet. But this kind of move, it pushes the world closer and closer towards a very, very bad reality. And I just want people to think, what is going on in this guy's head to think that this is a good time to invade Ukraine and to put the world on the brink. So let's hope that a peaceful resolution can be found as soon as possible.
Yeah,
Fiona's
definitely.
like, he needs therapy.
100%.
I think everyone needs therapy. I just genuinely believe this world after Amir just mentioned, and I think it just sums up my feelings too in this point in time. And it's been 3 years, guys. Oh, almost 3 years of COVID, the worst pandemic we've known in the past, like I guess centuries and so. And yeah, people don't realize that we've gone through a lot, like as a whole, as you know, earthlings, I say. So why go with war when you can just chill a little bit, when you just and with COVID it's real it's such a bad situation because in Ukraine the
Yeah.
vaccination rate is not that high. People don't know that. And when you're all in the bunkers, that's what my relative just texted me like you're all in the bunkers underneath the ground. So many people just stuffed into one space. There's no ventilation going out, and there are bombs and whatnot's happening. People are gonna get sick, right? They're stuck in there. They're gonna get
Yeah.
sick, and who's gonna
No
help,
good.
right? And there's no vaccination, so it's a horrible. It's kind of like on the brink of like humanity crisis, I must say. And when we need to, there needs to be more support, and people need to realize that it's an imminent issue. Like COVID is not like on pause when the war starts, right? COVID kind of happens and worsens the situation, and yeah, hopefully we'll get the better resolution as fast as possible. Yeah.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so. They're not the only leaders to manage to have a war during COVID, because we also managed to have a bout of fighting back in May, unfortunately, so it's not something that's just special to Putin. So if you thought that he was, special in any way, no, we beat you to the gun, Mr. Putin. Um,
Yeah.
so, but Fiona, it's
I,
been
I
a
wonder,
real,
since you guys are, experts in more like Israel-Palestinian conflict, what has
yeah.
been the, response from Israel in particular? I kind of didn't get a chance to explore that yet because with all the
That's a
information
good
That's
coming
important
through
question.
because
about
there's a lot
That,
of
Russia,
Russian and
like what has,
Ukrainians, yeah, in Israel. A lot of
so,
Russian and Ukrainian
oh
Jews
no.
yeah, it's a
on both
really good
sides.
question. It's a really, really good question. And I think Israel's just trying to play the mediator at the moment. And, they've kind of got deep connections with both countries. There's a huge Russian Jewish population, and there's a huge Ukrainian Jewish population as well. And there's Israelis on both sides of the conflict at the moment. So the Israeli position is kind of, just to try and mediate as much as possible to try and be part of any negotiations that are going on. If Israel can play a role as a mediator, I'm not too sure. But any kind of mediation at this point would be great. I know that there's been help for Israelis that were working in Ukraine. They were told a few weeks ago to even start leaving. There was, because there's many thousands of Israelis working in Ukraine, in Kiev, in other cities. They've had to leave. Even one of Israel's youngest and brightest talented footballers, Manor Solomon, he actually plays for a Ukrainian-based team for Shakhtar
Oh
Donetsk.
wow.
Yeah, so he's just had to leave as well, and come to
Oh wow.
Israel and put his career on hold, which is really sad because he's a very good young upcoming footballer, very, very good. So I think Israel's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because it's important for
Mhm.
them that the connections with Russia and the ties, but at the same time, it's very important the connections with Ukraine and all the Jewish life over there, and so I think. Like everyone, Israel would want a quick ending and resolution to this situation as soon as possible. Really, that would be kind of the best thing to happen, I guess.
Yeah. And I don't know, are you familiar at all with what the Palestinian Authority is saying about the Ukraine-Russia situation? I saw this one Jerusalem Post article that said, here we can screen share that article. Share screen. Okay, we're gonna see if this works. I'm gonna try to share the screen. Is it sharing? I don't know.
Not yet, I think.
1 second. This one. There we go. Okay. So this article is really interesting. It talked basically about how close ties between Russia and Palestinians are stopping them from taking sides in Ukraine. And it's really interesting because also, a lot of Palestinians feel, and Israelis will disagree with this, but in general, the Palestinian sentiment is that they're under a sort of imperialism from Israel. So they tend to side with, anyone fighting imperialism, in my little understanding of Palestinian politics. But I think from what this article is saying, that might not be the case here, at least from the Palestinian government.
Well, look, Anna, it's complicated because of the conflict here and the different sides here. Kind of, you always tend to get Israel and the PA to go off to different sides and support different entities. It's kind of a given at this stage. They do have very deep connections with the Russians and the Chinese. I think anyone that is small in this debate, like Israel, like the Palestinians, were very small nations compared to Ukraine and Russia, and I think it's of our best efforts to really just push for peace and negotiations. I think there's not much that can be done apart from our countries and our leadership really try and push to get to that negotiating tables as soon as possible, really. One thing that does remind me, you kind of have historical links with with the PA and other extremist groups like the IRA. There used to be connections back there, so I know during Soviet times, many of the Palestinian leadership actually studied in Russia, went and did degrees in Russia. I'm not sure if Mahmoud Abbas himself studied out there. I might be wrong. But those connections do go back a long way, for sure.
Yeah. I think kind of we're talking about that connection and the kind of the leaders among a lot of kind of the younger countries, like similar to Vietnam. We have a lot of leaders educated and got that, and a lot of politicians educated in Soviet Union and had such a close ties with both countries. And at that point, even it wasn't even like a division of each country or each bloc. It was just Soviet Union as a whole, like a one monolith as a whole. And very tough for them to even have this opinion and kind of have the best kind of diplomatic relationship with either of those countries, just in the best of the interest of the country themselves. So yeah, I do feel that one, because I do want to have more conversation like this and among my peers or whatnot in Vietnam. And I do realize that there's been such a shift in the way people talk about politics and international relations. It's not as, of course, not as free as the United States, or just like converse like freely, like have any opinions that you can just that's something people take for granted in the U.S. or in a lot of kind of Western countries. Like anything that pops up into your mind, like anything, maybe it hasn't even fully processed yet. Like it's just maybe just driven by emotions. You can just say it. And most
Mm.
of the time, repercussions, maybe people just say you're stupid. You don't have enough information about this topic. But here, there's like a real repercussion, or same in Russia, same in a lot of kind of countries like Russia, Vietnam. Like people need to be more educated and more informed before they say things, and
Mm.
people need to know who they're talking to, and rather than just say freely whatever they think, because it doesn't. Yeah, definitely. The U.S. has that privilege in itself to kind of have so many opinions on affairs of the world, but kind of not really kind of following up sometimes because yeah, yeah.
It's crazy. I remember when I first met you, it was right before the 2016 election.
Oh
And,
yeah, 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 yeah.
and I remember one of the things you said to me that I never thought about in my life before is you're like, wow, you get to vote. That's such a lucky thing.
Yeah. I don't know. I do miss 18-year-old me, like kind of thinking, wow, things in the world are you can make a change. Like, I mean, you
Yeah.
can still make a change. Like, you can still make a lot of changes as an individual or as a collective, but at that point in time, I was like, you can actually do something about this. Like, you can do this.
Yeah, but it just goes to
That's
show you because in the US and in any Western country, people are always very focused on the problems and the negative, and like we there is huge privileges that come with living here, even politically. Like as broken as our system might sometimes feel, like there's things that we have that are really good, and they're not
yeah,
everybody has that.
yeah, I mean the exchange of opinions and like free speech and all, it's like been something I remember when I was in Russia. It was like something to kind of like look down at. Like it's like what? Who needs that? It's not the best thing to have because you kind of reveal a lot about the nation when you say a lot of uh uninformed opinions, right? Like when you say random like anti-vaccination, that whole
Yeah.
thing and people say, why do you think free speech is a good idea when it comes to that? But there at least we can have discourses and maybe change someone's opinion or someone's mind with more informed, uh, decisions and whatnot. So yeah,
Having
it's
lived in
great.
both those kinds of environments, and you see like the downside of the misinformation that comes with you know kind of a dysfunctional but nevertheless democratic country in like the US, and you see like, wow, we did have misinformation. We did elect Donald Trump, who a lot of people don't like him. um and you've also seen living in a dictatorship like Russia, or even I don't know what Vietnam's government is like now, but it sounds like it's more towards less democratic than the US. you know
Yeah.
one is
In
better than the other, or do you think like
uh,
middle
I
ground?
never. It's never one. It's never an absolute thing. It's everything is very relative to you know to a like a context matters a lot, and I never had that. Like I think in a way it's a privilege to kind of been around and like seen all the sides of I mean not all. I've only been to three and only been aware about things when I was like a much older. And I think I'm still learning. I think I'm missing a lot of things, but to be fair, it's never like an absolute thing. Like I do, like I believe like Russia was bad. I actually at some point I did believe Russia was the best in the world because of how much I got like ingested with. I was so patriotic. I was so patriotic about the country that I'm not
Mm.
even a citizen of. Like it's something I wanted to share. Like I'm not even a citizen of Russia. I never had a Russian passport to begin with, but I was so proud. Like I knew like A to Z of the history at some point. I was so like proud and like I wanted to learn more about it. It was so rich. But in regards to the it's as I said, it's all context matters and what situation we're living in. So a lot of times like in Vietnam, like we had, how we dealt with COVID was, I never expected Vietnam to deal it so efficiently at times. I was like, wow, I was so lucky. Like I felt really lucky to be here at this, like at the point in time with COVID. And I'm still very grateful to kind of come back home and like learn more about my or mother country.
Mm.
But at the U.S. I spent again most formative years, and I learned how to have debates and talk to people with all the sides, all the backgrounds in the world, and and maybe come up with and maybe at least have a conversation in the same room about the same topic. It's such a small but such a significant shift in my kind of yeah in my life because I never thought that was possible. Like we
Mm.
learn to take sides a lot of times in life, and when you're young and you take sides, it's very hard to unlearn. Like I genuinely never thought it would be hard to unlearn biases. It's something you learn throughout life. You have to unlearn things and you have to relearn things. And in the US, I've learned that you can do that by just having a conversation, and it's as simple as it gets. Because maybe one conversation doesn't change your life, or even doesn't change your day, but it you did one step of trying to get another. You got the first step in. You got the first step of just asking about what other person thinks or acts, or what the other person's history is. And that's such a big shift for me because I never thought it never happened to me in Russia to begin with. People just
Mm.
kind of act as a mass a lot of times. Like people didn't care about individualism and just who are you as a person. Yeah, no one cares about you. You need to sacrifice yourself for the better of the group. A lot of group thinking happening, and I think a lot of kind of you learn in poli-sci, like group thinking populist movement comes from a lot of that. How
Mm.
you develop as a nation, since education and all that stuff. But yeah, I think it's all relative. Again, I want to like really emphasize that it's never like I do believe like Russia was better than America, or like Vietnam is better than this. It's never that. It's never that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Right. I guess I meant more not which country is better, but which system of government, if that makes
Which
sense.
system of government?
Yeah. But I'm sure that's a very complicated question because Vietnam handled COVID much better than the US did, but maybe you
Yeah.
don't have the conversations that you might have in the US that you have in.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean. Would you be able to say which form of I guess government like do you prefer, or which form of that have you lived, like Israel and now the United States and all?
Ooh.
None of them.
None of them.
None of them.
I do feel that when I lived in Israel, just living in another country I only lived there a year, but when I lived there, there were some even and that's also a fairly Western country with a lot of similarities to the US, but there were still shifts in my thinking that happened where I was like, oh, it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah,
Like
there's
just
an alternative. That's
there's an
always the point.
alternative.
Yeah.
Like Israel is much more, I think, obviously a lot of people don't know this, but Israel was kind of started by socialists, and some of that legacy is still there in the way
Mm,
people think very collectively. Even the way people talk about the mandatory military service it's so collective. It's like you have and Americans are so individualistic, at least in my experience. And I still feel that, because of where I was raised, I have more American culture, and I understand that and I'm more comfortable in the American
mm,
individualistic style of things. But it did open my eyes, like, oh, there's people who say that you don't have to do things this way. That you should, like, for example, in my gap year program, we had we would have these weekly, like, conversations between all the students in the program. It was 40 students, and it was half Israelis, half Americans. And we would basically like share our feelings and discuss in like a communal way, discuss like things that were bothering us, things that we liked. And we'd get kind of emotional, um and you know at the end of the allotted time, all the Americans would be like, okay, bye, we're gonna leave. And the Israelis would be like, no, we have to all stay because someone's sharing a very emotional thing. And the Americans were like, no, we set a certain time to be here. And it was so
mm.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Definitely.
and it was always divided. exactly like every American was like, we have to go. And every Israeli was like, if just one person in our group wants to stay, we all have to stay. And that was a super different mentality for me that I'm glad I had that perspective, even though I don't totally get it. And I know that's a small example, but that would be like the biggest exemplifier of what I felt were really different between those two countries.
Hmm.
And that's a really good point because I want to share a really quick story. I think that would like shows a lot about like Russian mentality and American mentality about like certain like in particular school, or I would say cheating in this particular offense here. So in a way, when I studied in Russia, we always had this thing when you if you so I happened to be unfortunately at the time like got my kind of best student at what I was doing, and I got my homework in and all that stuff. So I would do very well on tests, and I would just have my tests and all stuff. And but the way the way people like in my class kind of conditioned themselves that uh or and then in return conditioned me that the success of your success means everyone's success. Like if you get an A, you need to if you're gonna get an A and you know the answers, you gotta share those answers with us too.
Ah.
And I was like, and at the point in time, I never thought that was such a huge, such a like such a problematic thinking. I was like, I mean, I also kind of my situation, I'm Asian and Vietnamese kind of in the minority here, and I try to just
Hmm.
adapt into a majority. I just want to be a part of the group. I just want to be a part of them, so people like stop mocking me for my looks and my names and my whatever, my family. So I was just like, I guess if that's gonna make everyone happy and everyone gets an A, like that's a win-win for all, right? Like I get an A, everyone gets an A, right? That's so cheating equals good, right? Like cheating equals helping everyone and getting it's a win-win situation. It's like you get to help someone, and I'm gonna share what actually what opened my eye a little bit. But cheating, it was like, oh, that means that I'm helping you. Like I'm gonna get you're gonna get the result that you want, and I'm gonna get the result that I want, and you're gonna like me, and I'd be so happy. I'd be such a people pleaser. And then when I came to the United States, cheating was like a no-no, right? And academic integrity is something people value really really high, and people would actually report you if they saw you cheating, and that was such a mind-boggling thing for me. I was like, how could you do that? We're in the same boat here. We're in the same boat. Why would you do that, right? And then I realized no, it's actually the academic integrity holds some value because everyone agrees that academic integrity is the most important thing right now. So we need to shift our values a little bit, right? So there's a value shift there in just a small thing. And I also believe that my work means my work is I have value and I bring that value into my work. That means that I shouldn't really share that value right now with other people because I'm not helping them in the end of the day. I'm not really helping them learn. And that was such a shift for me. I was like, I mean, it's not to say that I just learned about cheating is bad, like only in the United States. Like I learned it like really early on in Russia because like there are repercussions, right? So Russia is like, you do something wrong, there are repercussions for you, really harsh repercussions, and you learn on the kind of like, people, yeah, on the kind of like, you cannot do this thing because teachers gonna, expel you, whatnot, but so that was such a shift in the way like you learn. And in America, at my school at the time, they were like, uh, you kind of it's like a moral failing. It was cheating is a moral failing. It's even worse than repercussion. So I was like so mind boggled. I was like, and yeah, it was very fascinating. Yeah.
It's
But on
interesting.
yeah. But the flip side is I feel that in America sometimes people can get really competitive and
Yeah.
so unless like you can see that mentality of the cheating and how like dramatically different it is. But also I feel that and maybe it sounds like it's true in Russia and it's kind of true in Israel and maybe any country with a communist history is that I think that focus on the collective can be really nice because if instead of constantly competing and me versus everybody else, you can also help each other more. which is, I think, one of the downsides of sometimes of U.S. culture.
Yeah, definitely. That's why international students are always happy to help each other in school. It was like a running joke at times. I was like so confused because I was like, why Chinese students are so willing to help me? Like they were like so willing to help me because we're in the same boat. Like that's how they believe it too. Like Russians and Chinese were kind of like just thinking cheating is fine. Everyone cheats. It's a win-win for all, right? Like you get an A, I get an A. Why bother? And then we got so offended when like an American student would report like one of them, like one of Russian student or one of Chinese students. They'd be like, damn, like that's insane. Like why would you do that? Like how could you do that? Like it was like a really like very high tension situation at times. It was
That's
like so
hilarious.
fascinating. Yeah.
That's hilarious. Now I'm loving the cultural differences and then the little nuances, and I think that it's part of the things that make life so interesting. You can go from country to country, from place to place, and things can mean different things, and you know everything needs to be taken with a little pinch of salt. And I think that's great that you found out the American way of not cheating, and trying to outdo each other is the best way, that competitive sportsman-like nature. I think it's awesome. It's been a real pleasure having you on, Fiona. I just want to say, and I've actually learned a lot more about the kind of mindset over in Russia, and I really thank you for all your input into what's going on over there. I feel like you've educated me a lot more on the situation, and of course we're hoping for a peaceful solution as soon as possible.
I'm
You're
hoping your
welcome.
family stays safe.
Yeah,
So I think you're
definitely.
cutting out, but I think from what I've heard is, I'm very grateful to be here. I'm so, so grateful to have this conversation. I think, uh, I also really needed this conversation. I think I think a lot of people also needed to talk about
Mm,
this and not to vent, but just to share their very, emotions and, their thoughts about what's happening because we're just, we are civilians. Don't have any much stake in the geopolitical game right now. I think we just tried our best to be
exactly.
happy and
Exactly.
be with one another and yeah.
Oh, that's really beautiful way to end it,
Thank you
Fiona.
guys.
Thank you, Fiona. I think that's a really, really beautiful way of ending it. And Anna, thank you so much for bringing Fiona, a lovely friend of yours, on.
Yeah,
It's been awesome.
she's amazing. Like,
She is. She really is. She
you're,
really is.
you're the perfect guest. I really, really appreciate it. And I always like, since we were 18 and I met you, I always thought you had like the most like nuanced and like humble perspectives on the world. And I always really appreciate hearing your takes on things.
Thank you so much. I mean, Anna, you yourself had been such a highlight of my college years, so it's been great to like reconnect back and
Yeah.
have a discussion. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Amir. Thank you, Anna. Have a lovely, lovely time.
All right. Should we send it off? What do? We do the clap?
I guess when Jared's not here, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to end these things anymore. So I think I'll just get the outro going. But thank you very much, guys. Leave a like, subscribe, comment, all that
Oh
kind of
no,
stuff.
great.
It really helps our channel grow. Um, and yeah, see you another time. And Fiona, welcome back anytime. Anytime.
Anytime.